Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance and watched the stars burn outside his window. 3 years ago, these same stars had been peaceful points of light that guided human ships through empty space. Now they marked the edges of battlefields where two great alien powers fought a war that threatened to tear the galaxy apart. The Zephyrian Empire controlled the northern sectors with their massive ships that could disappear behind energy shields stronger than small moons. The Catamaran Coalition ruled the southern systems with fleets of black vessels that moved like shadows and struck with weapons that could crack planets in half. Between them lay 17 star systems where neither side could claim victory, and both sides refused to surrender. Morrison had been an explorer once. He remembered the quiet days when his biggest worry was whether they had enough fuel to reach the next system, or if the coffee maker would break down during a long survey mission. Those days felt like a dream now. The Defiance was still officially an exploration vessel, but for the past year they had done more running than exploring. Every time they tried to study an ancient ruin or map a new planet, they found themselves caught between warships that shot first and never bothered to ask questions later. The war had made the galaxy a smaller and much more dangerous place. Today they were supposed to be safe. The Proxima Nebula was supposed to be neutral space where neither side would dare to fight because the electromagnetic storms made it impossible for their big ships to operate. Morrison had brought his crew here to study the ruins on Kepler 442c, without having to worry about plasma beams and quantum torpedoes flying over their heads. The archaeological team had been working on the planet's surface for 6 days and they had found something interesting. Very interesting. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker had called it the discovery of the century just that morning. Now Morrison was beginning to think it might be the discovery that got them all killed. Parker stood next to him at the main display screen with her, dark hair pulled back in the tight bun she always wore when she was thinking hard about something. She had been his first officer for 2 years, and Morrison had learned to read the signs. When Parker got that particular look on her face, it meant she had figured out something that would either save them all or get them into more trouble than they could handle. Right now she was showing him pictures of stone structures that looked like they had been built by giants, who understood mathematics better than any species in the galaxy. The ruins covered an area larger than most human cities, and they were older than any civilization anyone had ever discovered. The beings who built these structures called themselves the architects, according to the translation programs that Dr. Nathan Clark had been running all week. Clark was the best xenoarchaeologist in human space, and if he said these ruins were important, then Morrison believed him. The problem was that important archaeological discoveries had a way of attracting attention from people who wanted to use them as weapons. The galaxy was full of ancient technologies that had been turned into bigger and better ways to kill entire planets. Morrison did not want to add another item to that list. Parker touched the screen and brought up a new image that made Morrison forget about coffee and peaceful exploration missions. The picture showed a crystalline structure buried deep under the planet's surface. The crystal was the size of a small building, and it was glowing with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. According to the readings, it was generating some kind of gravitational field that the ship sensors could barely detect. Clark thought it might be part of a larger network that connected to similar structures throughout the galaxy. If he was right, then the architects had built something that could affect gravity itself across impossible distances. Morrison was about to ask Parker what she thought they should do when Communications Officer Diana Roberts spoke up from her station across the bridge. Her voice was calm, but Morrison could hear the tension underneath. Roberts had been monitoring emergency frequencies, and what she had to report made his blood run cold. Both the Zephyrian Empire and the Catamaran Coalition were moving their biggest fleets toward the same place. They were coming to the Proxima Nebula, and they would arrive in less than 12 hours. Someone had leaked information about the discovery, and now both sides wanted to claim it for themselves. The situation was worse than just two fleets racing to grab an ancient weapon. Roberts had been listening to encrypted military channels, and the messages she intercepted painted a picture of a war that had gone completely insane. Both sides were tired of fighting a conflict that neither could win. The Zephyrians had built a new type of planet killer that could destroy entire solar systems. The Cathmarans had developed quantum bombs that could make stars go supernova. Instead of seeking peace, both empires had decided to build weapons so terrible that victory would mean ruling over a galaxy of dead worlds. They were planning to use these weapons soon, and nothing would survive the aftermath. Morrison looked around his bridge at the crew that had become his family over the years of exploration and discovery. Security Chief Commander Alex Turner was checking weapon systems that Morrison knew would be useless against the warships heading their way. Engineer Sophie Wells was trying to boost power to the shields that would crumble like paper against military-grade plasma cannons. Navigation Officer Ryan Brooks was calculating escape routes through a nebula that would hide them for maybe an hour before enemy sensors found them. They were good people who had signed up to explore the unknown and make contact with new civilizations. None of them had expected to find themselves holding the key to ending the biggest war in galactic history. The Defiance shuddered slightly as another electromagnetic storm swept through the nebula around them. Morrison gripped the arm of his captain chair and made a decision that would change everything. They could run and let the two empires fight over the architect ruins until nothing was left but radioactive dust. They could stay and try to defend the Discovery with weapons that would barely scratch the paint on an enemy destroyer. Or they could do something that had never been tried before. They could attempt to understand what the architects had really built and why beings who were dead for millions of years had left behind. Technology that might be the only thing capable of stopping a war that threatened to destroy every living world in the galaxy. Morrison chose the path that scared him most, because it was also the only one that offered any hope of seeing another peaceful sunrise. Dr. Nathan Clark wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stood before the massive crystal buried deep in the ancient ruins on Kepler 442c. The structure rose 30 meters above his head and disappeared into darkness below his feet. Its blue glow pulsed in a rhythm that reminded him of a sleeping giant, breathing slowly and steadily. Clark had spent his entire career studying dead civilizations, but this was the first time he felt like he was standing in the presence of something that was still alive after millions of years. The architect crystal hummed with energy that his instruments could detect but not understand. Engineer Sophie Wells knelt beside her equipment array and tried to make sense of readings that changed every few seconds. The crystal was generating gravitational waves that should have been impossible for anything smaller than a neutron star. More strange was the fact that the waves seemed to be reaching out toward specific points in space, as if the crystal was trying to communicate with something very far away. Wells had designed gravity sensors for the most advanced human ships, and she had never seen anything like the patterns flowing through her displays. The crystal was not just creating gravity fields, but shaping them into complex signals that carried information across the galaxy. Clark walked carefully around the base of the crystal structure and noticed something that made his heart race faster. The blue glow was not random, but followed geometric patterns that looked almost like written language. The light flowed along channels carved into the crystal surface in spirals and curves that reminded him of mathematical equations. When he activated his translation programs, the computer suggested that these patterns might be instructions, or perhaps a kind of user manual left behind by the beings who built this incredible machine. The architects had not just created advanced technology, but had tried to teach others how to use it safely. Wells was adjusting her sensors when something unexpected happened that changed everything they thought they knew about the Discovery. Her hand slipped on the wet stone floor and she fell forward against the crystal surface. The moment her palm touched the glowing blue material, every alarm on her equipment started screaming at once. The crystal flared brighter than the sun, and the gravitational reading spiked so high that her instruments overloaded and shut down. But the most amazing thing was what Wells felt when her skin made contact with the ancient material. For just a moment, she could sense other crystal structures scattered across the galaxy like stars in a vast constellation. The gravitational pulse that erupted from the crystal when Wells touched it was strong enough to affect space and time several light years away from the planet. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Morrison watched in amazement as Diana Roberts reported that sensors had detected a Kethmaran destroyer being pulled out of faster-than-light travel in a completely different star system. The enemy ship had been traveling through hyperspace when the pulse reached it, and the gravitational wave had been powerful enough to disrupt their engines and force them back into normal space. If one crystal could affect ships across such impossible distances, then a network of crystals working together could control travel throughout the entire galaxy. Clark helped Wells to her feet and saw that her eyes were wide with shock and wonder. She described what she had experienced during the brief contact with the crystal as like touching the mind of something vast and ancient that spanned the spaces between stars. The architect network was not just a collection of machines but a form of consciousness that had been waiting for millions of years for someone to wake it up. Wells said she could still feel the other crystals, calling to her like distant voices asking her to help them complete a task that their creators had started but never finished. Back on the ship's security, Chief Alex Turner was monitoring enemy communications, and the news he brought to Morrison was worse than anyone had expected. Both the Zephyrian and Kethmoran fleets had detected the gravitational pulse and were racing toward the Proxima Nebula at maximum speed. More disturbing were the intercepted messages that revealed how desperate both sides had become to end a war that was bankrupting their empires and killing billions of their people. The Zephyrians were preparing to deploy a weapon called the Star Eater that could make entire solar systems collapse into black holes. The Kethmorans had built something called the Reality Ripper that could tear holes in space and time itself. Turner had been a soldier before joining the Defiance crew, and he understood military thinking better than most. The intercepted communications showed that both empires had reached the same terrible conclusion. They would rather rule over a dead galaxy than accept defeat to their enemies. The planet-killing weapons were not being built as threats or negotiating tools, but as final solutions to be used when conventional warfare failed to produce victory. Both sides were planning to activate their doomsday devices within the next few days, and nothing in the galaxy would survive the aftermath of such weapons being unleashed simultaneously. Morrison listened to the reports from his crew and realized that they had stumbled into something much bigger than an archaeological discovery. The Architect Crystal Network might be the only technology in the galaxy powerful enough to stop weapons that could destroy stars and planets, but activating such a network would require understanding technology that was older than any known civilization and more advanced than anything humans had ever encountered. Clark believed that the crystals had been designed as a safeguard against exactly the kind of galactic war that was now threatening to consume everything. The architects had faced their own extinction-level conflict and built their network as a legacy for younger species who might be wise enough to use it properly. Wells contacted the ship from the planet's surface and reported that the crystal was becoming more active with each passing hour. The gravitational signals were growing stronger and reaching further into space, as if the network was waking up from a sleep that had lasted for geological ages. She could feel other crystals responding from distant star systems, and the sensation was both wonderful and terrifying. The network wanted to be activated, but it would require precise coordination across multiple worlds and perfect timing to avoid catastrophic mistakes. Wells said she thought she could interface with the crystal directly using her neural implants, but the process would be dangerous and might change her in ways that no one could predict. Morrison stood in his ready room and stared out at the swirling clouds of the Proxima Nebula while he considered options that all seemed impossible. They could evacuate the archaeological team and try to escape before the enemy fleets arrived, but that would mean abandoning the only hope of stopping a galactic apocalypse. They could stay and fight, but the Defiance was an exploration ship with defensive weapons that would be useless against military battleships. Or they could attempt something that had never been tried before and trust their lives to technology that they barely understood. Morrison thought about the billions of innocent people living on worlds throughout the galaxy, who had no idea that their existence would end in the next few days unless someone found a way to stop the madness. He made his choice and called his senior officers to the bridge for a meeting that would determine the fate of every living thing in known space. Captain Morrison stood before his assembled crew in the main briefing room and spoke the words that would either save the galaxy or doom them all to become footnotes in history. Instead of running from the approaching enemy fleets, the Defiance would attempt to activate the complete Architect network across 17 star systems before the doomsday weapons could be deployed. The plan was so dangerous that Morrison could see the fear in his officers' faces, but he could also see the determination that had carried them through years of exploration in unknown space. They were scientists and explorers, but they were also the only people in the galaxy who understood what needed to be done. Navigation Officer Ryan Brooks spread a three-dimensional star map across the main display and showed the crew just how impossible their mission would be. The 17 crystal sites were scattered throughout the war zone in a pattern that would require them to jump from system to system while staying ahead of both enemy fleets and avoiding the battle zones where ships were already fighting. They would need to visit each site in a specific sequence to maintain quantum entanglement with the crystals they had already activated. Brooks had calculated that they would have less than 6 hours to complete the entire network before the planet-killing weapons reached their targets. Dr. Clark had worked all night to understand how the network functioned, and what he discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The architect crystals used quantum frequencies that were almost identical to the patterns generated by human brainwaves during moments of deep concentration and emotional connection. It was as if the ancient builders had designed their technology specifically for beings like humans, who could think and feel in ways that matched the crystal resonance patterns. But activating the network would require someone to interface directly with each crystal, using neural implants that could burn out a human brain if the connection was too strong or lasted too long. Engineer Sophie Wells volunteered to be the primary interface operator despite the risks involved. She had already touched one crystal and survived the experience, so she knew what to expect when the ancient technology tried to merge with her consciousness. Wells and Dr. Clark worked together to modify her neural implants with shielding that might protect her brain from overload while still allowing her to communicate with the crystal network. The modifications were experimental and dangerous, but they were the only hope of establishing the precise control needed to activate 17 sites without triggering catastrophic gravitational distortions. Communications. Officer Diana Roberts discovered something amazing while analyzing the quantum signals that connected the crystal sites to each other. The network was not just a collection of individual machines, but a form of distributed consciousness that could think and make decisions across galactic distances. When one crystal was activated, it immediately began coordinating with the others to create harmonic resonance patterns that could affect gravity and space-time throughout the local region. Roberts realized that they were not just activating ancient technology, but waking up a sleeping mind that had been waiting millions of years for someone to help it complete its purpose. Security Chief Alex Turner took charge of tactical planning and tried to find ways to keep the Defiance alive long enough to complete their mission. The ship would be defenseless while Wells was interfacing with each crystal, and they would need to jump to faster-than-light travel immediately after activation to stay ahead of pursuing enemy ships. Turner programmed the weapon systems to fire automatically if they were attacked, but he knew that their small defensive batteries would be useless against military-grade warships. Their only real protection would be speed and the electromagnetic interference from the nebula, storms that might mask their sensor signature. For a few precious minutes, the Defiance began its impossible journey by jumping to the second crystal site in the Epsilon Eridani system, where ancient ruins covered the surface of a dead world that had been blasted sterile by some long-forgotten war. Wells transported down to the planet with a full archaeological team, while Morrison kept the ship hidden behind the largest moon. The moment Wells made contact with the second crystal, the entire network responded with gravitational pulses that could be detected by sensors throughout the galaxy. The crystal awakening was like lighting a beacon that announced their location to every enemy ship. Within 50 light-years, Brooks had to recalculate their route constantly as enemy patrols and automated weapons platforms forced them to take longer jumps through dangerous regions of space where navigation computers could fail and leave them stranded between stars. Each crystal activation made the network stronger, but also more noticeable to the military forces that were racing to stop them. The Zephyrian Empire had deployed their fastest interceptor squadrons to hunt down the human ship, while the Kethmaran coalition sent stealth destroyers that could appear without warning and attack before their victims knew they were there. The time they reached the 6th crystal site, Wells was showing signs of severe neural strain from interfacing with technology that pushed human consciousness to its absolute limits. Each connection was stronger than the last as the network grew more active and more aware of what they were trying to accomplish. Wells reported that she could feel the ancient mind of the architect network reaching out to her thoughts and trying to share memories of the civilization that had built it. The architects had been peaceful beings who created their network to prevent the kind of galactic war that had destroyed their own people millions of years earlier. Morrison made the hardest decision of his career when he ordered the ship to continue the mission, despite Wells showing symptoms of brain damage from the neural strain. The medical scanners revealed that each crystal interface was burning out synapses in her brain, but Wells insisted that she could complete the network activation before her mind suffered irreversible damage. Morrison knew that he was asking her to sacrifice her sanity and possibly her life to save billions of strangers, but Wells had volunteered for the mission knowing the risks. She was determined to prove that humans could be trusted, with the most powerful technology in the galaxy. The breakthrough came at the 9th crystal site when Wells discovered that the network was designed to be operated by multiple minds working together rather than a single individual bearing the entire load. She was able to share the neural interface burden with Dr. Clark and Roberts, who volunteered to link their consciousness with hers through modified communication equipment. The 3 human minds working together could handle the data flow from the crystal network without any single person suffering fatal brain damage. The discovery meant they could complete the mission, but it also meant that all 3 of them would be changed forever by their connection to an alien consciousness. Enemy fleets were closing in from all directions as the Defiance jumped to the 13th crystal site in a system where 3 different battles were already raging between Cypherian and Kethmoran forces. Turner had to use the chaos of the ongoing space battle as cover, while Wells and her team worked to activate another node in the growing network. Plasma beams and quantum torpedoes filled the space around them as massive warships fought to the death just a few thousand kilometers away from their hidden position. Morrison realized that this was what the entire galaxy would look like in a few hours if they failed to complete their mission before the doomsday weapons were deployed. Sophie Wells felt the moment when the Architect network reached critical mass and became something more than the sum of its parts. 14 crystal sites were now active and connected across the galaxy, in a web of quantum consciousness that spanned impossible distances. The network was no longer just responding to human commands but making its own decisions about how to manage the gravitational forces flowing between star systems. Wells could sense the vast intelligence examining her thoughts and memories as it tried to understand the beings who had awakened it from its long sleep. The experience was like having a conversation with a mountain or trying to explain colors to an ocean. Captain Morrison watched the tactical display with amazement as the activated crystal sites began to create gravitational anomalies that affected the movement of every ship within light years of their positions. Enemy vessels found their faster-than-light drives disrupted by space-time distortions that forced them back into normal travel speeds. Weapon systems that depended on precise targeting calculations failed when the gravitational fields made it impossible to predict where shots would land. The network was not attacking the warships, but simply making it very difficult for them to fight each other or pursue the Defiance through the increasingly unstable regions of space. Dr. Clark was connected to the network through his neural interface when he experienced visions that showed him the final days of the Architect civilization. The images flowed through his mind like a movie played at incredible speed, but he could understand every detail with perfect clarity. The Architects had been a peaceful species that valued knowledge and exploration above conquest and warfare. They had built their crystal network during the last war their civilization would ever fight as both a weapon of defense and a gift for the species that would come after them. The network was designed to recognize young civilizations that were mature enough to value peace over victory. The visions showed Clark how the Architects had faced their own extinction when 2 factions of their people disagreed about whether to share their advanced technology with other species in the galaxy. One group wanted to guide younger civilizations and help them avoid the mistakes that led to war and destruction. The other group believed that primitive species would only use advanced technology to create better weapons and more efficient ways to kill each other. The disagreement had grown into a civil war that consumed their entire civilization and left only the crystal network as proof that they had ever existed. Communications. Officer Diana Roberts felt the network consciousness examining her memories of human history and culture as it tried to determine whether the species that had awakened it could be trusted with the power to reshape gravity throughout the galaxy. The network was searching for evidence that humans had learned to value cooperation over conquest and wisdom over raw power. Roberts shared memories of human art and music and literature that showed how her species had slowly grown beyond their primitive instincts for violence and territorial aggression. She showed the network images of humans working together to explore space and discover new worlds rather than simply claiming them as territory. The enemy fleets had finally tracked the Defiance to the 16th crystal site despite the gravitational interference that made normal navigation almost impossible. Cypherian Admiral Keththak commanded a battle group of 12 heavy cruisers that emerged from faster-than-light travel, just as Wells was beginning the interface procedure with the next-to-last crystal in the network. Kethamoran warlord Zixandra led her stealth destroyers out of the shadows where they had been waiting to ambush whichever side reached the crystal site first. Both commanders had orders to secure the alien technology for their empires and to destroy anyone who tried to stop them. Morrison found himself caught between two massive fleets that had been fighting each other for 3 years and were now united only in their determination to claim the Architect network for themselves. Admiral Keththak sent a message demanding that the humans surrender their archaeological data and submit to Zephyrian custody for interrogation about what they had discovered. Warlord Zixandra responded by powering up her quantum torpedo launchers and announcing that any ship that did not withdraw immediately would be destroyed without further warning. The standoff created a triangle of mutual destruction, with the Defiance trapped in the middle. Security Chief Alex Turner reported that both enemy fleets were preparing to deploy the doomsday weapons that would end the Galactic War by destroying everything worth fighting over. The Zephyrian Star Eater was a massive device that could collapse entire solar systems into black holes by disrupting the nuclear fusion processes that kept stars burning. The Kethmoran Reality Ripper was designed to tear holes in spacetime itself and create permanent wormholes that would make faster-than-light travel impossible throughout the galaxy. Both weapons were being charged and would be ready to fire within the next few minutes. Wells was halfway through the interface procedure with the 16th crystal when the network consciousness reached a decision that surprised everyone connected to it. The Architect intelligence had been watching the confrontation between the three fleets and concluded that the current situation was exactly what its creators had designed it to prevent. The network would not allow itself to be used as a weapon by any species regardless of their intentions or justifications. Instead, it would demonstrate to all three groups why the Architects had built their system and what it was really meant to accomplish. Morrison felt the deck of his ship vibrate as the partially activated network began to exert gravitational influence on everything within the star system. The Zephyrian and Kethamoran fleets found their weapons systems fluctuating as the space-time distortions made it impossible to maintain target locks or charge their energy weapons properly. Admiral Keththak and Warlord Zixandra both demanded explanations from their technical officers who could only report that the laws of physics seemed to be changing around them in ways that made warfare impossible. The network was not disabling their ships but simply making it very difficult for anyone to hurt anyone else. The breakthrough came when Wells completed her connection to the 16th crystal and the network consciousness decided to trust the humans with the location of the final activation site. The 17th crystal was not on a planet but built into an asteroid that had been drifting through deep space for millions of years. The asteroid was currently located in the exact center of the war zone, where both empires had been fighting their most desperate battles. Reaching it would require flying through the middle of the largest space battle in galactic history while both fleets were preparing to deploy weapons that could destroy the solar system. Morrison made the decision that would either save the galaxy or condemn his crew to die in the crossfire of a war that had consumed billions of lives. The Defiance would make one final jump to the 17th crystal site while the network provided whatever protection it could manage with only 16 nodes active. Wells volunteered to attempt the final interface despite the fact that her brain was already damaged from the neural strain of connecting with so many alien consciousness systems. She knew that completing the network would probably destroy her mind completely, but she also knew that failure would mean the end of every living world in known space. The moment Sophie Wells made contact with the 17th and final Architect crystal, the universe seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what would happen next. The ancient network that had waited millions of years for activation suddenly came alive with a power that made stars look like candle flames. Reality itself seemed to pause as gravitational waves swept outward from the crystal sites at faster than light speeds to create a field of influence that covered the entire war zone. Every ship and weapon and piece of military equipment in 17 star systems felt the touch of the Architect consciousness as it gently reached out to examine what the younger species had built and why they were using it to destroy each other. Admiral Keththak watched in amazement as every weapon on his flagship simply stopped working without any sign of damage or malfunction. The plasma cannons that could vaporize asteroids became as harmless as flashlights and the quantum torpedoes that could crack planets in half would not fire no matter how many times his weapons officers pressed the activation buttons. The Star Eater device that was supposed to collapse the local star into a black hole showed all green lights on its status display, but refused to charge beyond 10% power. The ship computers reported that all systems were functioning normally, but somehow none of the weapons would actually hurt anything. Warlord Zixandra experienced the same impossible situation as her stealth destroyers found themselves unable to fire their reality, Ripper weapons, or even their basic defense systems. The ships could still move and communicate and scan for targets, but every device designed to inflict damage had been rendered completely useless by forces that her engineers could not understand or counteract. The Kethmoran fleet was still fully operational, except for the fact that they could no longer hurt anyone or anything, no matter how hard they tried. Life support continued to function perfectly, and the faster-than-light drives worked normally, but the ability to wage war had simply vanished from their technology. Captain Morrison felt the network consciousness touch his mind and suddenly understood what the architects had really created during their final war millions of years ago. The crystal network was not a weapon, but a teaching tool designed to show aggressive species that there were better ways to resolve conflicts than mutual destruction. The network could not force anyone to make peace, but it could remove the ability to make war and give people time to remember what they had been fighting about before the killing started. The architects had faced their own extinction and built their network as a gift for younger civilizations that might be wise enough to learn from ancient mistakes. Through the quantum communication channels that connected every ship in the war zone, the architect network began to share its memories and knowledge with every conscious mind that was willing to listen. The network showed Admiral Keththak images of Zephyrian colonies that had been destroyed by the war, and the millions of his own people who had died fighting for causes that no one could clearly remember anymore. It shared with Warlord Zixandra visions of Moran worlds that had been turned into radioactive wastelands, and the children who would never be born because their parents had been killed in battles over territory that was now worthless. The network did not judge or condemn the warring species for their violence, but simply showed them the true cost of their conflict and what they could accomplish if they worked together instead of trying to destroy each other. The Zephyrian Empire possessed energy shield technology that could protect entire planets from natural disasters, while the Kethmoran Coalition had developed quantum computers that could solve problems no single species could handle alone. Combined together, their technologies could transform the galaxy into a place where every world could thrive instead of merely surviving. In the shadow of constant warfare, Admiral Keththak found himself experiencing memories that belonged to Kethmoran soldiers who had fought bravely to defend their homes from what they believed was unprovoked Zephyrian aggression. Through the network connection, he could feel their fear and desperation and love for families they would never see again. For the first time in 3 years of war, he understood that the enemy had not been fighting for conquest or glory, but for the same things that motivated his own people. The Kethmorans wanted to protect their children and preserve their way of life just as much as any Zephyrian did. Warlord Zixandra experienced the same revelation as she felt the emotions and memories of Zephyrian civilians who had watched their worlds burn during Kethmoran raids. The network showed her that the people she had considered monsters were actually parents and teachers and artists who created beautiful things when they were not forced to fight for their survival. The war had turned both species into caricatures of themselves, where only the most violent and aggressive individuals could rise to positions of leadership. Peace would allow the poets and scientists and dreamers to shape the future instead of leaving everything to the generals and warlords. The Architect Network maintained its gravitational field for exactly 72 hours while the leaders of both empires experienced what it was like to see the war from every possible perspective. They felt the grief of parents who had lost children, and the fear of soldiers who died far from home, and the desperation of refugees who had lost everything except their hope for a better future. The network did not try to change their minds or force them to make different choices, but simply gave them complete information about what their decisions had cost and what peace might accomplish if they were brave enough to try it. When the 72 hours ended and weapon systems throughout the galaxy began functioning normally again, neither Admiral Keththak nor Warlord Zixandra gave orders to resume the attack. Instead, they opened communication channels and began the first real negotiations that had taken place since the war started. The network had shown them that the resources they were fighting over could be shared, and the technologies they were trying to steal from each other could be traded freely. The galaxy was large enough for both empires to expand and grow without destroying each other in the process. Morrison watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the largest space battle in galactic history transformed into the largest peace conference in galactic history. Thousands of warships that had been preparing to destroy each other instead formed a massive fleet where former enemies worked together to establish the rules and boundaries that would govern the new era of cooperation. The Seventh Hegemony War ended not with surrender or victory, but with understanding and the recognition that both sides had been fighting for the same things all along. Sophie Wells survived her connection to the complete architect network, but she was changed forever by the experience of touching a consciousness that spanned the galaxy and remembered the rise and fall of civilizations across millions of years. She could still feel the network humming quietly in the back of her mind, and she knew that she would spend the rest of her life helping to maintain the crystal sites and teaching others how to use them responsibly. The network would remain active, but dormant unless another species threatened to repeat the mistakes that had destroyed the architects and nearly destroyed the current galactic civilization. The Defiance became the first ship of the new galactic mediation service, with Morrison and his crew serving as guardians of the architect network and mediators for disputes that might otherwise escalate into warfare. Humanity found its place in galactic civilization not as conquerors or merchants, but as the species that had proven they could be trusted with the most powerful technology in the galaxy. Other civilizations looked to humans for guidance when conflicts arose because they had demonstrated that sometimes the greatest victory was helping your enemies remember what they really wanted before the fighting began. The galaxy entered a new age where differences were resolved through understanding rather than violence, and where the ancient wisdom of the architects continued to guide younger species toward a future built on cooperation instead of conquest.